Welcome to CMMC Unacknowledged, where we ask our resident expert some of the unanswered questions that were asked during last month's CMMC-AB Townhall meeting. My name is Todd Stanton. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for all things CMMC at Etactics. And I'm joined by the Senior Information Assurance Manager at Rain Associates, Ty Wittenberg. Welcome, Ty.
Hey, Todd, thank you so much for having me, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. All right, our question for this episode starts with NIST Special Publication 800-53A, which uses the term assessment objects to describe items being assessed. So my question to you, Ty, is the CMMC assessment scope synonymous with this NIST term assessment objects?
So 800-171, for those practitioners that are utilizing it, realize that you can cross map to a lot of the NIST 853A controls, right? And so the objects really just speak to your ability to be able to identify that information in the system and then provide more granular interrogation, whether that be through testing, observation, or some form of shoulder surfing documentation.
Okay. Now in the level 2 scoping guide, there's table 2, which provides 3 types of security protection assets: people, technology, and facilities. So my question to you is, do these asset types apply to other categories like we've talked about before: CUI assets, contractor risk managed assets, specialized assets? Are there 3 types of those categories as well?
I would say people being tied to CUI is a little bit tough. But look, there's obviously folks that can memorize information and things like that. You could make a reference to that. I would say that, almost in the same genre or vein of like HIPAA, you're talking about some forms of administrative controls, some form of, technological safeguards, some form of organizational safeguards, and then physical safeguards. Read that question back to me again, because I think I was about to go off on an incorrect tangent here.
Sure. So we've got table 2 from the level 2 scoping guide, which talks about 3 types of security protection assets: people, technology, and facilities. So you were going down the path of, could a person be a CUI asset, right? We know a person could be a security protection asset, but could a person also be a CUI asset? Or could a person be a contractor risk managed asset? So can you apply those same 3 different asset types to the other categories that we've talked about before?
Yes and no. I think some of it becomes an assumption and a stretch. I think a strong cultural organization will realize some of the vulnerability there, and through those assets understand that through policy and procedure, through technical controls, logical controls, you manage and log and monitor some of those behaviors. Whether it be a person, a technology, or facility. I think we were talking about that a little bit earlier before on other episodes around, making sure that we, monitor access, facility, and stuff like that. It really becomes, while CMMC doesn't require a compliance officer like a HIPAA does sometimes, there is clearly some value in having that, because compliance in that particular regard encompasses everything from the technology to the facility to the people, and understands that they're this interwoven and critical part of the system. So I think monitoring and keeping track of your provisioning and deprovisioning of people, yes, that becomes an asset. If you're not very good at offboarding somebody when they leave the company, and those controls are still in place, and they might have some capability to remotely access that you haven't turned off, yeah, they are an asset, and it can potentially put you in a threat position, because that person has the capability to take action, and in some cases has more knowledge than an outside threat actor would to expose that critical or that controlled unclassified information.
Okay, so let's look at a particular practice. So we have awareness training, which is a level 2 practice. The NIST control number is 3.2.1, and it talks about training staff on security risk awareness, organizational policies and standards. So is it possible in a practice like this to assess any technology assets, or are we strictly focusing on the people assets here?
So this is really on organizational and administrative, right? Ensuring that, more importantly, that managers, that systems administrators, and users of the organizational system are aware of the security risks associated with their activities. And so, and tied to those policies that are security related to the systems, I think what you're talking about is a robust program where those systems that are CUI might flash a banner that when you log into it, this system, contains controlled unclassified information. A regular cadence with your folks that work in that DIB space and have access to that CUI that might have not only just exposure to security awareness around threats that are around regarding phishing or social engineering, but also around a threat awareness program, that somebody internally is looking at the threats that are out there on a regular basis and bringing folks up to speed so they're cognizant of it each and every day when they log in, that if an email does look suspicious, you don't click on it and open it, even if it is from a trusted email that you recognize, that you do a 2-step method of verification. You receive the email and then you call that client or you call that coworker and you say, hey, did you mean to send me this document, right? Before you click and open on it, especially if you weren't expecting it. So I think it's a robust approach to security awareness for the role, but also threat awareness too for what's going on externally outside of the environment.
And so in several of your answers, you've talked about processes and policies, and I'll kind of circle back to the reason why I started with the term assessment objects. When I read that definition from the 853A publication, it's kind of an aha moment for me, because you're able to align most of the assets that they talk about in that definition with what the CMMC assessment scope talks about, with one exception, and that is the term activities, right? And you kind of use the word processes, and I think that was a realization that, yes, we're talking about assets, but an activity or a process is not really an asset, but it is something that certainly would be within the scope of an assessment if we're talking about assessment objects and how we're evaluating whether these practices are in place. So I think that you're using the term process to really define that activity portion of that definition of assessment objects.
Yeah.
And so my last question, and this is probably a more difficult one, but is there a way, is there a mapping at all that we could know which practice or which assessment objective is focused on which type of asset?
I think if you're going through through the assessment guide and you're utilizing 800-171, there are some tools out there, even on NIST, that will allow you to see the cross mapping to the different controls that are in place and their families in the controls, I should say, in the NIST 853 that are invaluable as whether you be just starting out as a practitioner or you're seasoned, that you have that in your tool belt of things that you go back to just confirm it and make sure that you're using a common taxonomy to explain that with clients and to achieve that goal for the assessment.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the insight there, Todd. I think that was very helpful.
You're welcome.